Audio tape contains an unedited speech given by Dr. Gene Staniland on November 19, 1987, at the City National Information Systems Annual Executive Dinner held in Los Angeles. Side 1 contains the speech in its entirety, and Side 2 contains the question and answer session that followed.
Thank you very much, Newt. I appreciate the invitation to be here. I have met some folks that I know, Jane Netherton and some other people. I'm sure I've heard me speak at California Bankers Association. For my purposes, could I see a show of hands of people who have not heard me speak before? Would you raise your... Now there's a humbling statistic. You notice contradictory information in the biographical background. Anybody who knows anything about university and football rivalries knows about the one between the University of Alabama and Auburn. Have degrees from the University of Alabama and go to Auburn to teach. You learn how to maintain a low profile. Another contradiction is that when people hear me speak, they wonder if I really am a Southerner. As it turns out, I'm not. I was born in New York. My mother was a native New Yorker, but my father was a native of Montgomery, Alabama. We moved there when I was 5 years old, so I spent most of my life there and really consider Montgomery to be my home. In fact, my only claim to fame in the world is that I was in Montgomery and graduated from high school there in 1952, the same year that Bart Starr did. Bart Starr played his high school football at Lanier High in Montgomery and graduated the same year I did. I didn't go to Lanier. I never met him, but I was there. Bart left Montgomery, went into professional football. He's probably a millionaire a couple of times over. I went into teaching, and I was adopted by an Ethiopian family. I kept telling the dean of the School of Business at Auburn about my financial plight, that I was in need of further financial resources. He said, "My God, Staniland, there are other things in the world beside money." I said, "I know, Dean, there's poverty, sickness, hunger, disease." He said, "Yes, but just think of the fringe benefits, the prestige of being a member of the faculty of the greatest institution in the country." The dean was given to overstatement. And I said, "Well, maybe that's true, but when I was it the other day, I was headed down I-85 from Auburn to Montgomery. Highway Patrol were out taking pictures with their radar. They got mine. A student right in front of me had also been apprehended, was trying to talk his way out of it. He said, 'Well, officer,' he said, 'just get in the car.' He said, 'But my parents are going to kill me if I come home with another ticket.' Get in the car. He said, 'Now get in the car.' So it came my turn. I said, 'Well, officer, I was only going 60 miles an hour.' Get in the car. I said, 'But I've never had a ticket before.' 'You want to get in the car?' I said, 'But I'm a professor at Auburn.' Get in the trunk. The only thing I could figure is he must have been one of those Alabama people. Auburn is the land-grant institution in the state of Alabama. We're the ones with the ag school and the vet school and, well, they call us the cow college. Anywhere in the world you go, you find Alabama people telling Auburn jokes. You hear about the Auburn student who broke both arms raking leaves, fell out of the tree. How can you tell an Auburn funeral? Lead tractor has its headlights on. Sorry to hear your driver training program had to be discontinued. Your mule died. Tell them that's okay. Every year when the Auburn-Alabama football game is played, the event of the year in the state of Alabama, the game is actually played in Birmingham, not at either of the campuses. 2 or 3 weeks before the game, we get the students at Auburn ready to go to Birmingham. We tell them, "Now look, you're representing Auburn University. We want you to behave yourself. We don't want any fighting, drinking, all that kind of thing. And for God's sake, whatever you do, if an Alabama student throws a pin at you, run like hell because he's got a hand grenade in his mouth." See? I had to stop serving ice water at the University of Alabama. God had the recipe, graduated. But for all the joking that takes place about Auburn, I'm sometimes concerned that people believe all that stuff and not recognize it's a very good institution, has some outstanding schools, very good school of architecture, outstanding school of engineering, a school of veterinary medicine that has not just a national reputation, but an international, actually one of the best in the world. About 10 years ago now, we had this bull brought all the way from Scotland to the large animal plant. We had $35,000, $40,000 worth of bull right there on the Auburn campus. He was brought there because he had a family problem. Well, his problem was he couldn't make a family, and they were going to operate on him, see if they couldn't fix that. Unfortunately, the operation failed, and about 3 months later, they slaughtered him, which I thought was a bit steep. But while they didn't solve his problem, I understand it had quite a psychological effect on other bulls in Scotland. But they had a lot of people are not acquainted with the fact that there's a very famous animal in this country who suffered the same malady. Smokey the bear, the forest fire ranger putting out bear, never produced any cubs. So they brought him down there. The guy went out and watched him for a while. He came in. He said, well, shoot, it's no wonder. Every time Mrs. Smokey gets hot, he throws sand on her and beats her with a shovel. My business is economics. Tried to make a living teaching economics. Hasn't really been a good time to be an economist. In fact, I have suffered a double burden here in the last couple of years. I put up not only with the Auburn jokes, but with the economist jokes. Lay them all end to end, they wouldn't reach a conclusion. Economists have predicted 7 of the last 3 recessions. In Poland, they tell economist jokes. An economist is a person who did not have the personality to be an accountant. I've actually developed an inferiority complex. I don't even do forecasting anymore. Decided it's bad enough to be an economist, but to be a forecasting economist, you have to be a masochist. A masochist is a guy who takes laxatives and goes for long bus rides. I travel all the time. I get on the airplane, I get in there and sit down, they come in and sit next to me. So what do you do? I said, I'm an economist. Well, I spend the next hour and a half, 2 hours working. You know, what are the interest rates? What about these deficits? Found a solution. Get in there and sit down now. They come in and sit next to me. Say, what do you do? I said, I'm a proctologist. He wouldn't even shake hands with me. The economic system's going through a revolution. I think the 1980s will go into the economic history of this country as a watermark, probably second only to the Depression of the 1930s. It's that big in terms of changing the direction of the economy and, for that matter, the society. A revolution measured in a number of ways, but specifically a change in the financial structure of this economic system, deregulation, the move to monetarism by the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve, the thrust of our economic system into world competition, the likes of which we have not seen before, from which some of our companies and industries will survive. And thirdly, maybe more importantly for the longer term, a change in the philosophy of the people of this country about the relationship between government and the economy. A period in which the structure of the economic system is changing beneath the models that economists use to do the forecasting. Not at all unusual to watch the Today program, Good Morning America, see 2 of the most reputable economists in the country sit in the same room and give exactly opposite forecasts or respond to questions in different ways. A period in which those models and those forecasts become significantly important to us, they seem to be failing us. A period in which we ought to improve our economic literacy so that we have an opportunity to evaluate what the so-called experts are giving us, but better than that, have a shot yourself at where the economy is going. Look at the questions that you are prepared to ask in terms of what happened to the stock market. Why did it happen, and what's going to happen? What effect will it have on the economy? We are in the process of going through an election of a president in the United States. There are a great number of people who are running for office, and some of them have varying economic principles, philosophies. One of them is supposedly one of the authors, Kemp, supply-side economics. How do we make judgments about all of these things unless we have some understanding of some basic concepts, both political and economic, that got us where we are and are going to determine where we're going to go? So that's what I want to do, bring us up to speed on the concepts. In order to do that, I'm going to go back to the Depression of the 1930s, and in approximately 10 minutes, I'm going to explain Keynesian economics, monetarist economics, supply-side economics, and Reaganomics. In about 10 minutes. It takes the economics department at Auburn University an entire quarter just to do Keynesian. I'm going to do all four of them in 10 minutes, which will give you some idea of my ability. Or how much I know. There's the problem. Don't look at me. I don't make them. I just talk about them. The business cycle, recurrent ups and downs in the general level of business activity. Periods of recession like 1981-82. People lose their jobs, their incomes. Exacts a terrible human toll. Periods of hyperinflation that hits fixed income people and sets you up for an even worse downswing. Millions of hours of time and effort by economists, politicians, political scientists, and other people to solve this problem. The objective? To ameliorate the vicissitudes of the cycle. Did you get that down? In other words, cut off them humps. And bring the fluctuations within acceptable limits and do away with the worst part of the human cost on the thing there. The Depression of the 1930s, almost a decade of depression. Unemployment rates 25%. During that period of time, instead of the supply-siders, the Keynesian, they had a group of economists called the classical economists, and they said, I'm sorry, folks, but if you're going to have a free market system, you're just going to have to put up with the ups and downs because that's just a part of it. But don't worry about it, because built into a free market system are automatic mechanisms that as soon as you go into a downswing, the automatic mechanisms go to work to pull you out. The wage rate, the price level, and the interest rate. So they turned to Herb Hoover, and they said, Mr. President, the role of government in the business cycle is no role. Don't do anything. See, because if the government gets involved in the economy, you're going to mess up the automatic mechanisms. They're not going to be able to do their job. You're just going to make it deeper and longer. Just stay out of it. So Herb turned to us and said, prosperity is just around the corner. The mechanisms are coming. And a guy who'd been through 9 years of depression said, I don't think I'm going to make it to the corner. And along comes FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And he said, I'm going to do something. And they said, what? And he said, damn if I know. But something. And did that ever capture the imagination of the people? And the next thing you know, we had the New Deal. You remember the 100 days of the New Deal? The day after inauguration, legislation started to pour out of the Congress of the United States. They jumped right slap into the middle of the business cycle with both hands and feet. A 180-degree turn from the economist of the day who said government should stay out of cycles. The government jumped in. Well, what happened? What was the change? The change was a British economist by the name of Lord John Maynard Keynes who comes along, and he says, I know what causes the business cycle. And you people that spent these millions of hours trying to figure it out, you're going to feel stupid when I tell you. Because it's so simple. There is a functional relationship between the level of demand and the level of employment. It is spending that determines the business cycle. If people buy things, you've got to hire people to produce that output. And if for whatever reason people stop buying things you don't have to produce, you lay people off. He said, for instance, if you've got an economy like ours, that requires, let's say, $4 trillion of spending to keep everybody fully employed. And if for whatever reason the private sector, businesses and consumers, only spend $3.95 trillion, then Keynes says you're just $50 billion short of enough spending to keep everybody a job. And Franklin said, well, that's great, Keynes, but what do I do about it? How do I fix it? And Keynes says, well, if you know it's a deficiency of spending that's creating the problem, that's what you fix. And how do you correct an economy for a deficiency of spending? You put money in the hands of people. Because if you put money in the hands of people, what are they going to do with it? They'll spend it, and spending does away with the unemployment. He said, Franklin, buddy, you people are already in the system. The government is taking money out every year. It's taxing. It's putting money in every year. It's spending. Let's say you tax $900 billion and you spend $900 billion. If you've got a deficiency of $50 billion, Franklin, all you got to do is change one number and fix the whole thing. Change this 0 to a 5. Pump $50 billion of money into the system. That gets into the hands of people. They're going to spend it. That does away with the deficiency of spending, moves you back to a full employment level of demand. Franklin, you just swooped down on unemployment in the business cycle. And Franklin said, damn. Or words to that effect. He said, you mean that's all there is to it? I said, shoot you, you just put the thing in, it goes back up. What you're just observed here is the birth of Keynesian economics, aggregate demand theory, or demand-side economics as opposed to today's supply side. All right, everybody's got to remember this now before I turn the page, because this becomes the basis of the relationship between government and the economy since that day. Also observe that these two numbers are not alike anymore. So you took in 900, but you spent 950. You just created a what? A deficit of 50 billion, but don't worry about that. We got out of the Depression. War came along. After the war was over, they got together in Washington and they said, you know, we can't find hardly anybody who enjoyed the Depression of the 1930s. And the Congress said, well, shoot, we'll just outlaw them. Passed the most important piece of economic legislation ever passed in this country called the Employment Act of 1946. And the Employment Act of 1946 said, from this day forward, it is the responsibility of the federal government. Remember that part. It is the responsibility of the federal government that we don't like depressions and unemployment. You will make full employment. Also, we don't like prices going up through the roof and down through the floor. You will make stable prices. And certainly we want to retain our culture and history of freedom. You will make a free economy. And oh, I do want the standard of living go up, so I also want you to make it grow. From the day that piece of legislation passed, presidents live or die by the numbers. Presidential election is a numbers game. The unemployment rate, the inflation rate, the growth rate. How did Reagan beat Carter in 1980? What did he say? Are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? God, that was dirty. What did the Democrats say in 1982 when the unemployment rate was 11.5%? Are you better off now than you were in November of 80 when you elected him? On Inauguration Day, Carter's interest rate became Reagan's interest rate. Carter's deficit became Reagan's deficit. The most interesting thing about that is presidents don't have either one of those. It's impossible for a president of the United States to have a deficit. Only the Congress can pass revenue measures and appropriations bills. A president doesn't have an interest rate. The Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve has an interest rate. He gets responsibility for both of them, but he can't control either one of them. Sounds like your job. Whether it's right, wrong, or indifferent, presidents have to produce the numbers. Presidents like to get reelected. You're the chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors. The president calls you in one day and he says, I want to come back. Do it. And you say, Mr. President, I think we got a couple of problems here. If you're going to inject the government into the system to maintain full employment, how are you going to maintain a free economy? And once you start to pump the system up to do away with the unemployment, do you have any idea at all what you're going to do to the price level? Prices are going to start going, you see. And when you start fighting the inflation, you're going to create, and how the hell are you going to, you see, because if you can't, if you got, and the guy from Auburn says, do what? Because some of these things are mutually exclusive. By virtue of getting one, you can't have the other one. But economists, never to be daunted, said, don't worry about it, we can do it. If you understand the Keynesian, the aggregate thing there. You're the chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors. The president calls you in one day and he says, we've got an ugly here. We've got some unemployment. Fix it. And you say, don't you worry about it, Prez, because we got the Keynesian hickey. Mr. President, you've got unemployment. You know it results from a deficiency of spending. Solution, get money into the hands of people. Mr. President, there are actually two tools that are available to the government of the United States that can be used to achieve the goals of the Employment Act of 1946. First tool is called fiscal policy. Second tool is called monetary policy. Fiscal policy is nothing more or less than the budget. It's the taxing and the spending that Congress does every year. That's fiscal policy. Monetary policy run by the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve. They control two variables: the quantity of money in the system and the cost of that money, the interest rate. Mr. President, you've got unemployment. First thing we want you to do, fiscal policy, taxes. We want you to lower taxes. Leave more money in the hands of people, because when they get that money, what are they going to do with it? They'll spend it, and spending does away with the unemployment. With regard to government spending, Mr. President, we want you to increase government spending. Government can actually reduce the ranks of the unemployed directly. Build another highway, a missile, a gun, a knife, or a bullet. With regard to monetary policy, you want more money out there? That's easy, a loose money policy. We want you to pump reserves into the banking system, make money easy to get. And with regard to the cost of money, the interest rate, we want you to drive interest rates down to encourage people to come to the banks, borrow the money, and spend it. And he does all that. And 7 or 8 months later, he called you in and he says, God bless you. You're the best thing since sliced bread. I'm telling you, the unemployment is gone. This this is outstanding. However, we have developed a little problem. Prices going right out through the damn roof here. We've got inflation. Prices going up so fast, the only way to make ends meet is to stand back to back. See if you stand back your ends. If the problem of unemployment is a deficiency of spending, what's the problem of inflation? Too much spending. Too many dollars chasing too few goods. So, Mr. President, first thing we want you to do to fight the inflation, fiscal policy, taxes, we want you to take the money away from them. If you let them keep it, they're going to spend it. Take it away from them. With regard to government spending, surely you don't want the government contributing to inflation. You've got to cut government spending. The revenue sharing's got to go. With regard to monetary policy, if the very definition of inflation is too much money, that's easy, a tight money policy. Get the reserves out of the banking system. Make money hard to get. And with regard to the cost of money, the interest rate, I want you to drive interest rates up to discourage borrowing and spending in the first place. And the President's response to your advice is, get out. Never have run for office, have you, boy? Who in his right mind in our political system is going to run on a platform of, I'm going to take your money? I'm going to take the money away from you so you can't spend it. And with regard to government spending, you can forget about the revenue sharing. We're going to cut Social Security. We're going to get your mother. With regard to money, ain't going to be none. And if you are lucky enough to find some, you're going to pay through the damn nose for it. Vote for me. Well, who in his right mind is going to run on a platform like that? Well, hell, nobody. And nobody has. Since the end of the Second World War, it doesn't make any difference what the economy is doing. It's going up and down. We get this policy. Democrats, Republicans, liberals, conservatives, we get this policy. And somebody said, yeah. And look what it did for us. The worst recession we've had since the Depression of the 1930s. Prime interest rate of 21.5%, inflation rates of 13%. And somebody said, yeah, who's responsible for that? And you know what our national pastime is in this country? We sit here and point our finger at Washington. So everybody knows it's political leadership. They're all known from the neck up. Next time you point your finger at Washington, watch out for your thumb. See, it's a republic. It's a representative form of government. Those people are very sensitive to what you and I want. No, not what we want. What we demand of them. And what is it that you and I have demanded of them ever since the end of the Second World War? We wrote it down in 1946. Said we want the government to take all the uglies out of the world. Nobody's going to get unemployed. No business can go bankrupt. Lockheed can't go bankrupt. Chrysler can't go bankrupt. We don't want anybody to be sick. Take care of the old people, young people, middle people, clean up the air and the water. And then we put a tagline on the end of it that said, we prefer not to pay for it. And I want to congratulate everybody in here. We have elected to office people in this country who have achieved that objective. They've taken the uglies out of the world, and it's been free. It doesn't cost any. Your taxes don't have it. You don't have to give up one government program. It's free. Bull feathers. That's a euphemism. How do we get it free? It is, well, for the last 4 or 5 years, our government has been taxing $800 billion, spending $1 trillion. Our government. Personalize that. Who are we talking about? Senators, representatives, people you and I call up on the telephone and tell them what uglies we want taken out of the world. They go to Washington and they pass laws. We're talking laws here, gang. They pass laws to spend $1 trillion, take the uglies out of the world. But they pass laws to collect only $800 billion. They hand this as a matter of law to the Treasury Department of the United States, and they say, do it. And right away, down at Treasury, something catches their eye. He said, you gave me 8, you told me to spend, where the hell's the 200? Where's that coming from? Well, where has it come from for every year since the end of the Second World War? Because we've run deficits for just about every single one of those years. Treasury draws up a little IOU, puts the angels all around the edges of it, IOU, $200 billion. Bounce across the street up there in Washington to the government's bank, Federal Reserve Bank, and they say, oh, we're a little short. Federal Reserve goes to the Treasury's account. They take this note receivable as an asset, put it on the asset side of the, one of the few words you can't abbreviate. Take this note receivable as an asset, debit, offset with a credit to the demand deposit account of the Treasury of the United States. What you've just observed is a critically important concept called monetizing the debt. You take a debt instrument which is not money and converted it into a demand deposit that is money. You've just increased the money supply $200 billion. If your money supply was already hovering at about $500 billion, you've just increased purchasing power 40%. At what rate are we adding things to buy in our economy? Our long-term trend rate is 3%. You're adding things to buy at 3% and purchasing power at 40%. Somebody said, I wonder where inflation comes from. But it was free. It didn't cost us anything. Till 1979, people are starting to work a short week, prime's going to 21.5, inflation, so forth, and somebody said, I don't think it's free. And in 1980, we got us a new beginning. A new beginning. Somebody said, how did we get us a new beginning? Said, well, shoot, Reagan decided we was going to have one. Biggest mistake made in this country is the political leadership thinks they're in charge, management thinks they're in charge, and labor thinks they're in charge. Well, you're not. I am. The voter and the consumer. Milton Friedman, at a recent seminar, was giving an example of politicians. He said, you ever watch the ducks when they migrate? They go in a big V, and there's a lead duck right out in front. He said, if you ever just sit and watch them, every once in a while the flock will veer off. And the lead duck, he's out in front, he can't see him, he doesn't realize that. And all of a sudden he looks around, he says, oh, damn, and he runs over and gets back and... Well, Milton said, that's a politician. But he said, Reagan is a different breed of duck. And he said, hell, he's been out there flying by himself for 20 years. And all of a sudden he looks around and he says, damn, they're behind me. Where did the flock come from? I mean, Reagan has always been out there. He's had a few ducks flying around him. But he's never had 43% of the organized labor votes that he got in 1980. 46% of organized... We're talking about union people voting for a Republican conservative who's somewhere right of Genghis Khan. Where did the flock come from? Watching Evening News, 1979, year before the New Beginning election, blue-collar worker Flint, Michigan is on the national news leading a tax revolt. Not David Rockefeller, blue-collar, proxy for that mass of middle-income people out there, and boy, he's hotter than $700. He said, you people got $6,000 from me last year. You ain't getting nothing this year. What are you doing with the money? Because he watched Geraldo Rivera do one of his white paper things on the tube the night before that said, did you know that $5 billion of your food stamp money is running dope internationally? That year, gang, we were going down the fiscal tubes to the tune of $200 billion. In spite of that, they took $2.94 billion of his tax money, and they bought butter from dairy farmers with that. They put that butter in storage so he couldn't get it. They let him pay $600 million for the damn storage. And then so he don't feel left out, they let him go down to the grocery store, pull some more money out of his pocket, and buy margarine to replace the butter he's already bought where he can't get it. And blue-collar worker Flint, Michigan says, do what? And damn it, he feels rained on. It's like my two students at Auburn. We got Gary Bancroft here and Tyrone Eaton. Auburn University campus, 3.5 hours by car from Panama City, Florida. The beaches of Florida. Very popular place with the Auburn students. More popular than Auburn. I've got my two students here, Bancroft and Eaton. Gary, outstanding student. Comes in, works hard all the time, just great. Tyrone, Makes F's is what she does. And the reason she makes F's is, at the beginning of every quarter, she loads up the car with beer, she takes off to Panama City. Misses 48% of the classes. Meanwhile, Bancroft's in there humping it every day. End of the quarter, I post the grades. Gary A, Tyrane F. 2 or 3 days after I post the grades, I get a knock on my office door. There's Tyrane. She comes in, she says, we've got an ugly here. I got an F. Have any idea at all, do you, what the psychological impact of a damn F is on somebody? And I want you to know, I didn't appreciate being put in a competitive environment with Gary and them other people. It worried me the whole time I was in Florida. And by golly, I want something done about it. I said, oh, damn, Mary Tyrane, must have lost my head. I tell you what we'll do. We'll take Gary's A, average that against your F, and give you both C's. No more ugly in the world. Utopia. And Tyrane says, outstanding way to run a university. And Gary says, do what? Beginning of the next quarter. Tyrane's loading up the car with beer. She yells over and says, hey, Gary, get in there and work, buddy. I need that C. So Bancroft comes to me and says, you don't give me a C. It doesn't make any difference how much work. You're going to give me a C. What the hell? Don't look at me. She's the one that's in Florida. Well, I'm not going to give you an A's worth of work. If you're going to give me a C, I'll take that effort, put it somewhere else. End of the next quarter. Gary, C. Tyrane, F. Average those two, and they both get D's. And Eaton says, hell, I'm in Florida. I'm passing. And Gary says, would you run this whole thing by me one more time? The beginning of the next quarter. Tyrane's loading up the car with beer. Gary comes over and says, move over. So that's where your new beginning came from. New beginnings in this country do not issue from the political leadership, Democrat or Republican. They come from the people. Reagan is the lead duck because he's going in the direction that the people want to go. You see, what business and industry must learn in this economy if you are to survive this revolution is to learn the same thing that political leadership found out, and that is you're not in charge. You know, we have entire industries in our economy who are in the process of demise because they don't understand how a free market system works and that they are not in charge. Look at our automobile industry. Year after year, the tradition has been that those people go up there in Detroit and they get in this little room, management, labor, and the investor, and decide what they're going to have, what they got a right to, and what they're going to take. And labor says, I got to have $25 an hour. And the investor says, hey, got my life savings in it. I ought to get at least a 30% rate of return. Management says, well, shoot, I put up with both of you. I ought to get at least a $100,000 base salary. Who's not represented in the room? The buyer, the consumer. Oh, he's allowed to stand outside the room. And when they get through deciding every year what they're going to have, what they got a right to, and what they're going to take, somebody goes over there and opens the door and announces to him, it's going to cost you another $600 this year, sucker. Till a few years ago, they got in that little room and decided what they're going to have, what they got a right to, and what they're going to take, and somebody went over there and opened the door to announce it to the consumer, and he wasn't there. And this little car went by. Then they said, what the hell was that? What that was the boss. The boss just spoke. Boss said, I don't like your crap. I don't like the quality of it, don't like the way you treat me. I've got an alternative. See, I spend my time going across the country talking to corporate management, labor, union and non-union investor, and I'm preaching to them, and what you people have to understand is that no one of these groups can satisfy their economic self-interest by cutting each other's throats. You got to beat the competition first. They did it again this year. You know, labor goes in and says, we're going to get $5 more an hour. And management's response to that is, you and whose damn army's going to get anything? We cutting yours, and we're taking it. And the investor says, when y'all get through, you kick me another 10%. And the Japanese are standing on the sideline saying, get him again. And they're walking away with the market. I find it inconceivable. We have industries, companies, who have actually survived in this system with no understanding of it at all. Eastern Airlines has a strike. That's not unusual. Pilots don't like management. Management don't like machinists. Flight attendants don't like anybody. None of that is unusual. You know what I find amazing? They want me, the customer, to listen to their problem. It may shock Eastern Airlines to find out I don't give a damn about them and their problems. I don't want to listen to their problem. I've got my own. I don't want to run their business. You see, in a free market system, the customer says to you, the business community, you bring your product or your service and you sit it down right next to these others, then I'm going to tell you who the hell survives. You don't tell me. And in that kind of environment, Eastern Airlines, the pilots took out ads in the paper for me to read. It's hard to soar like eagles if you're working for a bunch of turkeys. Next day, management takes out an ad for me to read. Well, if you think we're turkeys, let me tell you about them. And the flight attendant, and they're pushing signs at me in the airport. And I said, I don't believe you people. Don't you understand that at Hartsfield International Airport, Atlanta, Georgia, all I got to do is I do a right face. I walk down here 20 feet. I turn left. I'm standing under a sign that says Delta. You know what Delta wants to talk to me? Do they talk to me about I don't like and we got a union and this? Only thing I've ever gotten out of Delta is, where do you want to go? How can I help? Let me brush your teeth. And in that kind of environment, we're going to get people who get in a little room and they're going to decide what they're going to have and what they got. Not in this day. I have a recommendation for you. Anybody in here works for a bank that still thinks that these are the people who are in charge and he's not? Get on back to your place and get all your crap in one little pile, because you're going. And he's going to see to that. You see, what we have to understand, first of all, is that this is the boss and that we're in it together. And when I say we, and one of the things that is missing in the banking community is that we are exclusive about we. We don't always talk about all of us we. You know, when we think about the customer, look at how many things you do in terms of the platform where the customer meets the bank. The tellers, the loan officers, everybody on that platform. That's where you meet the public. And that's where we put our emphasis, and you've got to smile at them or brush their teeth, whatever it takes. But how many people in management, top management, or board of directors ever go and visit the people in operations? You know, does anybody even know where they are? Do you know what they do? You know, and when you go back there, and the idea is it's not for a director, for instance, to go and management or listen to problems, but to go back there and say, I know you're alive. I know what you do, and I know how important it is. Because you can brush their teeth on the platform, but if that statement gets to their house and it's all screwed up at the end of the month, you've just canceled everything that happened in the platform. Now, it may be the people in the platform who's going to get it when they come complaining. But the idea is that we are in it together, and that this is the boss. You don't decide what you're going to do. He does. There's no set of social or economic institutions anywhere else in the world better than what we've got in place in this country to solve any economic problem you want to talk about. Oh, you know, the system gets in trouble. We have the unemployment and recession. And they come out of the woodwork and they say, I told you the system is no good. You ought to have this, that, other thing. Tell them I think the system is a lot like Winston Churchill used to be. Winston used to like to partake of the grape. He used to drink a lot. Was at this social gathering one night and had partaken to excess. He was drunk. That's what he was. Lady Astor was in the group and was incensed that a man of international standing would appear in public intoxicated, just ate at her the whole evening until finally just got the best of her. She walked right up to him, looked him right in the eye and said, Mr. Churchill, you are drunk. To which he responded, yes, madam, and you are ugly. However, in the morning, I will be sober. She said, Mr. Churchill, if you were my husband, I would poison that drink. He said, madam, if you were my wife, I'd drink it. I think the system is a lot like that. It has its nights before. But the morning always does come. Because of my profession, I've had an opportunity to look at the alternatives. You believe me when I tell you that this system at its worst, better than anything else going on in the world today. Thank you very much. Has threatened me with a question period. Observe, I did not say question and answer. And there is decorum and manners in a question and answer period. There's a list of things you do and a list of things you do not do. And right at the top of the list of things you never do is to ask the speaker a question to which he does not have an answer. Because it makes him look bad and feel bad. And if you were in my classes at Auburn, it would get you an F. Now, does anybody want to ask a question? Tell you what, to get us started, I have memorized a forecast. Yes. And the interesting thing about this is this comes from Blue Chip Economic Indicators. Some of you may be aware of it. It's a monthly newsletter. Comes out about the 10th of the month. And it's a compilation of 51 of the largest computer models in the country, from brokerage firms, banks, government agencies, universities, private consulting firms. They take these 51 and they give you percentage changes for gross national product, the consumer price index, unemployment, short-term interest rates, and they use the 90-day bill rate as a proxy for that, AAA corporates for long-term, housing starts, and auto sales. Now, what the interesting thing about this is that they give data for this year and next year. And what this is going to be, for instance, they say when 87 ends at the end of next month, the growth rate for GNP will have averaged this percentage. And this was his average for the year. And you remember about averages. If a person stands with one foot on a block of ice and the other foot in a fire, on the average, they will be comfortable. But the interesting thing about this is to look at the forecast that they made in October and then the one they made this month and what happened in between. The stock market went away. In fact, their October forecast came out about the 10th, which means that 8 days later, the market went down 108 points on Friday and 508 on Monday. And now, just the 10th of this month, after the market went away, they've come out with their forecast, and it's interesting to watch the changes or lack of change. First of all, now we know immediately for 1987, most of the year is gone. So even whatever happened to the stock market, there isn't enough time to really change the full year. So most of these are going to be the same. Before the crash, they said this year would have ended up at 2.6% growth, real growth. Consumer price index 3.8, it stayed 3.8. Unemployment 6.2, 6.2. Now the first change you're going to see is in short-term interest rates. Before the crash, they said that short would have averaged 6% this year. Now they're saying they're going to average 5.8. Now what happened? The Fed started to pour money in as a result of the stock market thing, and short-term rates have gone down, even significantly enough in the last 2 months to affect the year's average. Even long-term rates too, a little bit. They say after now, November, they'll say it averaged 9.3. Before they were saying 9.4. Housing starts didn't change. 165, 165, 10, 3, and this came down 1. I think the early returns on the automobile situation right after the market went down, is the luxury cars especially, just really got hit hard. However, this is where the changes show up. They're before the crash and after the crash vision of next year. Before the crash, they said next year was going to be a 2.8 year, observed a little better than last year. Since the stock market went down, they say next year is going to be 1.9. Now, but the most significant thing about that number is it is still positive, which means that 52% of these 51 modelers, 52% of economists agreed on something, which, you know, we ought to have a party right there. Said we will not have a recession in 1988, even with the market doing what it did. Now, before this, they were saying that we would not have a recession in 88, that it would actually come in 1989 and be in the third quarter. 1989. September the 28th, 8 o'clock in the morning, we're going to start a recession. I don't know what the hell is going to happen the rest of the night, and they're talking about 2 years hence. The one change, however, is that they are now saying it will come earlier in 89. But even so, they've been saying it would last only a year. They're still saying we'll have a recession in 89 and it will last a year. But now remember, there are 52% of them. There's 48% who don't agree with that. Some of those say it's going to be in 88. Most of them say it will be in the 88. A very small percentage of them say we are now in a recession. It started the day after the market went down. It's what makes racehorses. Let's see. Consumer Price Index, before the market went down, they said would be 4.6 for next year. Now they're saying 4.2. Obviously, if you expect the activity in the economy to go down, then what would you expect the pressure on prices to be? Unemployment, and you would all expect this to go up. If the economy is going to slow, then unemployment would go up. Short-term rates, they say, are going to average 6.8. They said 6.8 before the market went away. Now they say that the short terms will average 6% next year. Long-term rates, they said, would before the crash, they said they were going to average 10.2. Now they say 9.7. Automobile starts took a hit, 159 and 155. Housing starts, auto sales, 10.5 before the crash. Now they say they'll be 9.9. Now, as far as I know, these models are hundreds of equations, thousands of equations, and they have data from the past. The way you make a projection is that you look at the data, as it's occurring over the years, and then you fit a line to that with a statistical formula, and you get a trend line. So if you want to know what's going to happen out here, then you just draw the line out and say, there it's going to be right there. Now, you see, with regard to forecasting, I have my own principle. If you give numbers, don't give dates. I also like long-term forecasting. These people actually put out a 10-year forecast. But think about it. If you're going to do forecasting, see, they'll say, well, in 10 years, this is going to be right here. But what they don't say is that in between, we're going to have a disaster in the Middle East, we're going to have a boom here, and that's all. But you get to the 10th year, and they say, that sucker hit it right on. Like our bank president, he came in last year, at the end of the year, he hit net income almost to the dollar. It was just, and the board looked at that and they said, my God, give him a break, take two, they're small. Until you look back up in his budget, and he missed one expense 100% that way. And the only thing that saved him is he missed another one 100% that way. But by the time he got to the bottom line, he had that thing surrounded. Best thing is just not to get into the forecasting business. But at any rate, as you can see, still positive, no recession, and if you look at the numbers that are coming in, by golly, it looks like the consumer has not really responded the way a lot of people thought they might. There is some slowdown. The consumer confidence level put out by Conference Board and the Michigan Research Institute has showed about a 5% decline, and they expected it to be much more than that. Spending decisions and so forth seem to be cooking right along. Now, there are some, like we said, the luxury cars and things like that, but it appears. And you also have to remember that the market has an outstanding reputation as a leading indicator. It is one of the 12 leading indicators. And it has an outstanding record in forecasting upturns. When we've been in recession, the market has forecast the upturn by an average of 6 months. But the record of the market in predicting downturns is not as good. In 1962, 66, and 77, stock market nosedived, and we had no recession after any of the three of those. In other words, if you look back at the history of it, it has a much better record of predicting ups than it does downs. Yes, sir?
Yes. Do you think this country will ever pass a balanced budget amendment? And if they did, how would it affect the economy?
I think that as close as we're ever going to get, we've already got in Graham-Rudman. Graham-Rudman is sort of a poor man's balanced budget amendment, if you will. It is a law that requires the demise of our budget deficits over a period of time. And in essence, if you were to graph it, it looks like this. The budget is here. And over these years, they say it's got to come down and disappear in the 5th year, I believe it is, whatever it is. So that this year they're looking for a $23 billion increase or a reduction, a combination of reduction in spending or increase in taxes. And then in the following year and so forth. Now, the interesting part of this is, and this would have the same effect as a balanced budget amendment. The law says you've got to do it, and if you don't do it, we're going to do it automatically. Now, the problem is, as with this, as with the balanced budget amendment, what happens when the economy goes into a recession? Suppose these forecasters are correct, and year after next, we go into a recession. In 1981-82 recession, for every 1% increase in unemployment, government spending went up $24 billion. Now, I mean automatically. I mean without anybody passing a law to do anything. The laws on the books right now, when people lose their jobs, they automatically become eligible for what? Everything. Unemployment compensation, food stamps, housing help, and so forth. So that for every 1% increase in unemployment, automatic increase in government spending. That's why those big deficits, you remember, in the 81. Now, let's suppose that that happens, and let's suppose that our target for this year is $18 billion. But all of a sudden we go into a recession. That means in order to stay on Gramm-Rudman target, we're going to have to increase taxes or decrease spending by $42 billion that year in a period of recession. If the government in a period of recession raises taxes and pulls back spending, what does that do to the economy? It contracts it. So the provisions in that law for that, and they'll say essentially what would happen is we would suffer a little delay in the target. See? Because in essence what would happen is the deficit would jump back up here and then you would go from there and come back down. You see? But either one, the balanced budget amendment would have run into the same problem. You know, if you got a law that says you've got to balance the budget. In essence, what this kind of thing does is for the first time since 1930s, the Keynesian concept is, it is the government's job to lean against the economic ill winds. If we're in a recession, they're supposed to help get employment going again. If we're in a period of inflation, they're supposed to pull us back. This would put the government in the position of making it worse. In other words, they would contribute to unemployment in the downswing and contribute to inflation in the upswing. So you have to, the important thing here is that this is a law, and that both parties, both political parties, and the first time in my memory, as a result of this, maybe the real significant contribution of the so-called New Beginning is that both parties are now in agreement that deficits are bad. Up to this point, one party said they're terrible, and the other party said, hell, don't make any difference, take two, they're small. But you've got a Democratic and a Republican philosophy about how to do it. See, the deficit is a two-variable problem, taxing and spending. That's not really much of a problem. There's two variables. And the last presidential election eliminated one of the variables. In other words, Mondale said, well, the way to solve this problem is to raise taxes. Mondale didn't do well. So what you just did is reduce this to a one-variable problem. I mean, this one is out. You don't do that, so that you're only left with one. You ain't got no problem no more. All you got to do is reduce spending. Well, where are we going to reduce spending? The folks in Alabama think California would be an outstanding place to start. See, that's our problem. Where do you cut? And you watch the government's, the president's men and the congressional people trying to solve that problem in the past few weeks. And what they're trying to do is the impossible. We're going to solve this problem and nobody's going to get hurt and nobody has to pay a cost. Can't be done, gang. You see? Two philosophies. Democrats say what we've got to do is raise taxes sufficiently to hold the line on spending or maybe increase a little bit. And Republicans say, no, that's not the way to do it. What we got to do is we got to cut spending sufficiently to hold the line on taxes or maybe reduce them a little bit. Congress is now dominated by the Democrats. And more recently, we've had the stock market go away. So what we're going to end up with is a combination of the two. I haven't heard today, I've been on an airplane all day, as to whether or not those folks did they actually come out, or are they going to wait till the last minute tomorrow? Tomorrow's the day when if they don't do something and the automatic 23 billion cuts go in. Whatever it is, I would project that it's going to be minimal. It'll probably be 70, 60, in other words, over a 2-year period, which means they'll just maybe make the 23. But at any rate, the effect of it, what's important, though, is that they're actually doing something. Even if we have these temporary setbacks, you got to have it. If you don't get that, then you're never going to get the confidence of the financial markets either in this country or around the world. We're going to be in trouble. Value of the dollar, our interest rates, or everything else at home. Nobody wants an F. Any others? Yes, sir.
How do you think interest rates will perform in 1988?
I didn't hear that.
Interest rates in 1988?
1988. Well, given the activities of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve, which is one of the most speedy turnabouts probably in the history of monetary policy, from raising the discount rate, and in my estimation, to help the value of the dollar in the world market last year, and a tightening up and rising interest rates, and as soon as the market took its dive, then of course since then they had been loose. The betting has always been that during a presidential election year, you would have an easing of rates. Now you've got a double impetus for that. I think that what's critically important is it is not free to say, as we have done, Baker and Greenspan, that we are not worried about the value of the dollar in the world market anymore. We don't care where it goes. We are going to have as first priority avoidance of a recession in this economy. So the dollar just has gone away. That's not free. That has to impact this economic system ultimately. In my view, what needs to be done is a very close monitoring of our situation, and as soon as it appears that it is at all possible, is for the Federal Reserve to start firming up to help protect the dollar. I think what we're going to do, as long as there is any threat of a recession, we're going to stay with our current policy. We're going to hope for help from Germany, Tokyo, and the other places, you know, in the international community to help us with that. In other words, we have been trying to get the Germans to reduce their interest rates, discount rates. They seem to be holding very firm that they're not about to even let a hint of inflationary forces get started. So they've got the rest of the world really worried now, especially the economic community, European community, because they're the leader over there. What happens to Germany happens to the rest of them. We're getting cooperation. The book that was written by the guy at Southern Methodist, where it was the Depression of 1991, his book has been observing parallels between 1929 situation and now. And that's one of the big changes, you know, that we, instead of raising barriers between us and devaluing currencies and all of that kind of thing, we're actually getting cooperation between nations. And obviously, it's not gratuitous. We are the market. The United States, that's why we get $150 billion trade deficits. This is where they're selling the stuff. They have as great or greater interest in our not having a recession as we do. The question is can we get the cooperation? If we can, then they may help us, you know, put a floor under the dollar and maybe get it back up. But as far as what's actually going to happen to interest rates, I think that they'll stay down and the Fed will continue to be easy as long as there's any chance. And right now, you can't tell. That market is still. I have likened it to be having shell shock. You know, suppose you were getting ready to go to work and you're in your bathroom getting cleaned up. The gas furnace in your house blows up. The house goes away. I mean, it just blows up around you. And the only thing you've got is the singed underwear you've got on you. Your hair is burnt and so forth. You are suffering from shell shock. Now that's what happened in the stock market. The last thing you need to do to a person like that is to run up behind them and say, boo. The economy, the people, the investors, the consumers don't need anything abrupt at this point. You know, whatever you do, even if the Fed decided it was going to go back and start to prop up the dollar, which maybe interest rate's going to come back, you better do that very carefully, very slowly. This fiscal policy thing, I think to do what Dole has suggested, to hit that thing for $50 billion this year, I think it would have that kind of effect. That's a boo. You see, because if you $50 billion contract, what's that going to do to the economy? Well, it's a psychological thing. You see, we got macroeconomics, microeconomics, and psychoeconomics. And it's the psychoeconomics that is prevailing right now. Where did that 198 come from? Our assessment of the psychological impact. Every time somebody comes out of those discussions and says something, the market reacts. The president says, I don't think the dollar should go down anymore. The market goes up. The next day, the Fed doesn't do anything about it. The market goes down. You know, Pohl, the president of the Bundesbank in Germany, made a speech not long before the market went down. And he just made a statement that he thought the United States would probably not shore up the dollar. And the next day, the market's just... In other words, that's the kind of environment we're in. Nobody knows what's going to happen to that market. What we've got to do is to make sure that we don't do anything very sudden, because we're still suffering from that. I have been given the time that I am to leave now because he runs this thing. And he has told me I got to get off. I really appreciate you. You have been outstanding, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thank you.